The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Riverdale, Colorado, as Tessa Taylor stared at the letter in her trembling hands, tears blurring the damning words that confirmed what the whispers around town had been saying for months. Her husband had taken a mistress in Denver. It was 1878, and at 26 years of age, Tessa had believed herself secure in her marriage to Garrett Taylor, the town's prominent banker. The signs had been there for nearly a year. His frequent business trips to Denver, the cooling affection, the way his eyes no longer met hers over dinner. But seeing it confirmed in black and white in a letter meant for him but mistakenly delivered to their home crushed whatever hope she had clung to. Tessa sank to the wooden floor of their large house on Cherry Street, the grandest in town, clutching the paper to her chest as though embracing her pain. The home they had built together now felt like a beautifully decorated prison. Outside, life in Riverdale continued, men heading to saloons after a day's work, shopkeepers closing up, families gathering for supper. But inside these walls, her world was shattering. She wiped her tears with the sleeve of her blue cotton dress, tucked the letter into her pocket, and forced herself to stand. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 6 times. Garrett would be home within the hour, expecting dinner, expecting her to be the perfect, obedient wife she had always been. Tonight, however, everything would change. When Garrett arrived, handsome in his tailored suit with his perfectly combed dark hair, Tessa confronted him in the parlor, the letter extended in her shaking hand. "What is this?" she asked, voice steadier than she had expected. Garrett's face paled as he recognized the stationery. "You had no right to read my personal correspondence. It was delivered here, to our home." Tessa took a deep breath. "Her name is Victoria?" Garrett's expression hardened. "This is not a conversation we need to have. What happens in Denver is my business." "Your business?" Tessa's voice cracked. "I am your wife. And you will remain so," he replied coldly. "This changes nothing about our arrangement." "Arrangement?" The word stung worse than a slap. "Is that what our marriage is to you?" Garrett sighed with irritation. "Tessa, be reasonable. Men of my position often have companions. Victoria understands my needs in ways you cannot. But you are my wife, the mistress of this house. Your position in society is secure." Tessa felt something inside her break. "I want you to leave." "Don't be ridiculous. This is my house." "Then I will leave," she said, turning toward the stairs. Garrett grabbed her arm. "You will do no such thing. What would people say? You will stay, and we will continue as we have been. In time, you'll understand this is for the best." That night, Tessa lay awake in their bed, Garrett sleeping soundly beside her, as though nothing had changed. As moonlight filtered through the curtains, she made her decision. She would not live as a ghost in her own marriage, pretending not to know about Victoria, accepting crumbs of affection when it suited her husband. At dawn, while Garrett still slept, Tessa packed a small valise with essentials and the money she had saved from her household allowance. She penned a brief note explaining she needed time away to think. Without looking back, she slipped out of the house and headed toward her only ally in Riverdale, her childhood friend, Martha Wilson, who ran the local boarding house. Martha took one look at Tessa's tear-stained face and ushered her inside without questions. In the safety of Martha's kitchen, Tessa finally let herself collapse, sobbing out the truth about Garrett's betrayal. "You can stay here as long as you need," Martha said, pressing a cup of hot tea into Tessa's hands. "That no-good husband of yours won't dare make a scene here." "I don't know what to do," Tessa admitted. "Divorce would ruin me, but I cannot go back to him knowing." Martha squeezed her hand. "One day at a time, dear. For now, rest. Tomorrow will look different." But Garrett was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. By noon, he had learned of her whereabouts and arrived at the boarding house, all charming smiles for Martha and controlled fury for Tessa. "You've made your point," he said when they were alone in Martha's parlor. "Now it's time to come home." "I'm not coming back," Tessa said, surprised by her own resolve. Garrett's smile disappeared. "You have no means to support yourself," No family here. Where will you go? I'll find work. He laughed coldly. Who would hire a banker's wife? You have no skills, Tessa. His words cut deep because they contained a kernel of truth. What did she know beyond managing a household and hosting dinner parties? Still, she lifted her chin. I'll manage. Garrett studied her for a moment. Very well. Stay here if you must, but remember you are still my wife. I'll continue to provide an allowance. When you tire of this tantrum, our home awaits. After he left, Martha found Tessa staring out the window. He's right about one thing, Tessa said quietly. I need to find work. Martha considered this. My cousin Rose owns a small ranch outside of town. She's been looking for help since her husband passed last winter. It's hard work, and the pay is modest, but you'd have a roof over your head away from town gossip. The next morning, Tessa sent a note to Rose, who responded with an offer of employment. 3 days later, with Garrett making his displeasure known throughout Riverdale, Tessa boarded the weekly stagecoach headed west toward Willow Creek. Rose's ranch was modest compared to the Taylor home, a sturdy 2-story house with a wide porch, a barn, and several outbuildings, surrounded by rolling grassland and backed by distant mountains. Rose herself was a sturdy woman in her 40s with calloused hands and kind eyes. I can't offer much, Rose said as she showed Tessa to a small but clean bedroom. Room, board, and $5 a month. You'll help with the house, the garden, and the chickens. Can you cook? Yes, Tessa said, though her experience was limited to directing the cook in her own kitchen. Rose seemed to read her thoughts. Well, you'll learn. Tomorrow, we start early. Early meant before sunrise, and the work was harder than anything Tessa had ever done. Her hands blistered from unfamiliar tools, her back ached from bending in the garden, and her first attempts at cooking on a wood stove resulted in burned biscuits and undercooked beans. But each night, bone-tired as she was, Tessa fell asleep with a strange sense of accomplishment. The ranch employed 3 cowboys who managed the small herd of cattle, gruff, older men who kept to themselves and took their meals in the bunkhouse. Tessa rarely saw them except at a distance, which suited her fine. She wasn't ready to face men's judgment or curiosity. 2 weeks into her new life, Rose announced over breakfast. Ethan Miles is coming today to help with the fence repairs. You'll need to prepare lunch for 4 instead of 2. Ethan Miles? Tessa asked, kneading dough for the day's bread. Best ranch hand in the territory. Works for himself, hired out when needed. Good man. Quiet. Rose studied Tessa. He doesn't know town gossip, if that's what you're worried about. Ethan Miles arrived mid-morning on a chestnut gelding, a tall figure silhouetted against the sky. Tessa watched from the kitchen window as he dismounted with fluid grace, removed his hat to greet Rose, revealing sun-bleached brown hair that curled at his collar. Even from a distance, she could see he was younger than the other ranch hands, perhaps 30 or so. Tessa busied herself preparing a hearty lunch of stew and fresh bread, trying to ignore the fluttering nerves in her stomach. She hadn't spoken to any new people since leaving Riverdale, and the thought of facing a stranger made her acutely aware of her position, not quite a servant, not quite Rose's equal. At noon, Rose called Ethan in for lunch. He ducked through the doorway, removing his hat to reveal eyes the color of summer sage. His face was tanned and weathered from years outdoors, with laugh lines at the corners of his eyes that softened his otherwise serious expression. He nodded politely to Tessa but said little as they ate, responding to Rose's questions about the fence work in a low, measured voice. Only once did he address Tessa directly. "The bread is good, madam," he said simply, and she felt an unexpected flush of pride. After lunch, he returned to work, and Tessa to her chores. Through the window, she caught glimpses of him working efficiently, his movements economical and sure. There was something compelling about his quiet competence, so different from Garrett's showy charm. Over the next few days, Ethan continued the fence repairs. Each day, he would come in for lunch, thank Tessa for the meal, and return to work. By the third day, his presence felt less intrusive, and Tessa found herself looking forward to the brief respite of lunchtime. On the fourth day, as Ethan was preparing to leave, he approached Tessa as she hung laundry. "Mrs. Rose says you're from Riverdale," he said, hat in hand. Tessa tensed. "Yes. I'm heading there tomorrow for supplies. Anything you need?" The unexpected thoughtfulness caught her off guard. "No, thank you, Mr. Miles." He nodded, seeming to sense her discomfort. "If you change your mind, let me know before sunrise." He turned to go, then hesitated. "The wildflowers are blooming in the north meadow. Worth seeing if you get a chance." It was the most he'd spoken to her, and Tessa found herself watching him ride away, puzzled by the simple kindness in his suggestion. The next morning, Tessa woke early and walked to the north meadow. The sun was just cresting the horizon, painting the landscape in gold. True to Ethan's word, the meadow was carpeted with blue and purple wildflowers, swaying gently in the morning breeze. Tessa stood among them, breathing deeply, suddenly aware of a lightness in her chest that had been absent for too long. When she returned to the house, Rose was in the kitchen. "Ethan's gone to town," she said, eyeing Tessa's windblown hair. "Saw you headed to the meadow. Pretty, isn't it?" "Beautiful," Tessa agreed. "I've never seen anything like it." Rose nodded, something knowing in her expression. "Ethan doesn't talk much, but when he does, it's worth listening." Late that afternoon, Tessa was gathering eggs when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Ethan dismounted, leading his horse toward the barn. In one hand, he carried what appeared to be a small bundle. Curious, Tessa finished her task and headed back to the house. As she approached the porch, she found a small bouquet of wildflowers different from those in the meadow, deeper purple with delicate yellow centers placed carefully on the steps. No note, no explanation. Rose came out, saw the flowers, and smiled. "Looks like someone's caught Ethan's eye." "Surely not," Tessa protested. "He barely knows me." "That man's been riding this territory for years and never once brought flowers to this ranch," Rose said. "Until now." That evening, Tessa placed the wildflowers in a jar of water on her windowsill. As she prepared for bed, she caught herself smiling at them, a small warmth kindling inside her heart that felt dangerously like hope. The next morning, Ethan returned to continue work on the fences. At lunch, he seemed the same as always, quiet, respectful, focused on his food. Not once did he mention the flowers, nor did Tessa. It was as if they existed in a world separate from words, a silent acknowledgement between them. Days passed into weeks, and Ethan became a regular presence at the ranch, finding reasons to help with various repairs. Each time he left and returned from his travels, a new small bouquet would appear, sometimes on the porch steps, sometimes on the fence post near where Tessa hung the laundry, once even balanced atop the water pump. Never a word about them, just the flowers and the silence. Tessa began to look forward to these simple gifts, these wordless conversations. They asked nothing of her, expected no gratitude or reciprocation. They simply were much like Ethan himself. One evening in late July, Tessa sat on the porch after finishing her chores, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. She heard footsteps and turned to find Ethan approaching, hat in hand. "Evening, Mrs. Taylor," he said, using the name she still carried. "Mr. Miles?" She gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Please." He sat, placing his hat on his knee, looking out at the same sunset. For a while, they simply existed in comfortable silence. "Thank you for the flowers," Tessa finally said. Ethan nodded. "You're welcome." Another silence, but not uncomfortable. "Why?" she asked eventually. He considered this, running a thumb along the brim of his hat. "Seemed like you could use something beautiful." The simple truth of it brought unexpected tears to her eyes, which she quickly blinked away. "How did you know?" "Your eyes," he said softly. "They're sad, even when you smile." Tessa looked down at her hands, surprised by his perception. "I left my husband," she admitted. "He has another woman." Ethan was quiet for a moment. His loss, he said finally, with such conviction that Tessa looked up, meeting those sage green eyes directly for the first time. It's not that simple, she said. Never said it was. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. Just said it was his loss. With that, he tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Tessa with a strange mixture of emotions she couldn't quite name. The next day brought unexpected news. A letter arrived for Tessa from Martha in Riverdale. Garrett had filed for divorce, citing abandonment. While divorce was scandalous, he had somehow managed to position himself as the wrong party. The gossip in town was that his beautiful mistress from Denver had moved into their home on Cherry Street. Are you all right? Rose asked, finding Tessa staring at the letter in the kitchen. I don't know, Tessa admitted. I should feel devastated, but instead I feel relieved. She looked up at Rose. Is that terrible of me? Rose shook her head. Sounds like the beginning of freedom to me. That afternoon, when Ethan came in from repairing the chicken coop, Tessa was waiting with a glass of lemonade. My husband is divorcing me, she said without preamble, handing him the drink. Ethan accepted the glass, his expression unchanged. What do you need? The question startled her. Not platitudes, not judgment, just a simple offer of help. I'm not sure, she admitted. I've never been on my own before. You are now, he pointed out. Seems to me you're doing fine. Tessa thought about her blistered hands, now calloused from work, her arms strong enough to carry buckets of water, her ability to cook meals that people actually enjoyed. Yes, she said with some surprise. I am. Ethan finished his lemonade and handed back the glass, his fingers briefly touching hers. Tomorrow's my day off. Thought I might ride up to the lake. Company would be welcome, if you're interested. It was the closest thing to an invitation she'd received from him. I have chores, she began. Go, Rose called from inside the house, not even pretending not to eavesdrop. The chores will wait. Ethan's mouth quirked in a rare half-smile. Sunrise? He asked. Tessa found herself nodding. Sunrise. The lake was a 3-hour ride from the ranch, nestled in the foothills of the mountains. Ethan provided a gentle mare for Tessa, and they set out as the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky. They rode mostly in companionable silence, Ethan occasionally pointing out landmarks or naming birds that flew overhead. The lake itself was a revelation, crystal clear water reflecting the surrounding pines and the blue sky above. Ethan spread a blanket under a tree and produced a simple picnic of bread, cheese, and dried fruits from his saddlebag. It's beautiful here, Tessa said, looking out over the water. How did you find it? Got lost during a thunderstorm years back, he explained. Best wrong turn I ever took. They ate without hurry, the silence between them comfortable rather than strained. Afterward, Ethan suggested a walk around the lake, and Tessa readily agreed. As they walked, Tessa found herself talking more than she had in months, telling Ethan about her childhood in St. Louis, her move to Colorado after her parents died, meeting Garrett at a town social when she was 21. He was charming, she said, remembering. So sure of himself, so certain about the future he wanted. It was easy to get swept up in his vision. And what vision did you have? Ethan asked. The question stopped her. I'm not sure I had one, she admitted. I just wanted what my mother had, a home, a family, security. And now? Tessa looked out at the lake, considering. Now I want to be my own person. To make choices because they're right for me, not because they're expected. Ethan nodded, as if this made perfect sense to him. Good vision. They continued walking, and gradually, Ethan began to share pieces of his own story growing up on a small farm in Nebraska, losing his parents to influenza when he was 17, working his way west from ranch to ranch, learning every aspect of the work before striking out on his own. Why not settle down? Tessa asked. Have your own ranch? Ethan shrugged. Never found a place that felt worth stopping for. There was something in the way he looked at her that made Tessa wonder if his answer might be changing. On the ride back to the ranch, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Ethan looked at the darkening sky with concern. "We should pick up the pace." They urged their horses faster, but the storm moved more quickly than anticipated. Soon, fat raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a downpour. Ethan pointed to a small line shack visible in the distance. "There!" By the time they reached the shelter, they were both soaked through. The shack was basic one room with a small stove, a rough table, a chair, and a narrow bed, but it was dry and had firewood stacked beside the stove. "Used to be a way station for the cattle drives," Ethan explained as he quickly built a fire in the stove. "Still maintained for emergencies." Tessa stood shivering by the door, suddenly aware of how her wet dress clung to her body. Ethan rummaged through a trunk and produced a rough woolen blanket. "It's not pretty, but it's dry," he said, handing it to her before turning his back. "I'll step outside while you change." "You're soaked too," Tessa protested. "I'll manage," he said, heading for the door. "Wait," she called. "There's room enough for us both." "I'll change behind the blanket if you turn your back." Ethan hesitated, then nodded once, turning to face the wall. Tessa quickly removed her wet dress and underthings, wrapping the blanket around herself like a shawl. It scratched against her skin but was gloriously warm. "You can turn around now," she said, hanging her clothes on a hook near the stove to dry. Ethan removed his sodden coat but kept his wet shirt and pants. He sat on the single chair, leaving the bed for Tessa. "You should get out of those wet clothes," she said. He shook his head. "Wouldn't be proper." Tessa found herself smiling at his gallantry. "I'll close my eyes." After a moment's hesitation, Ethan nodded. Tessa covered her eyes with her hand, listening to the rustle of wet fabric, the creak of the floorboards as he moved. "Decent," he said finally. She opened her eyes to find him wrapped in another blanket, his clothes hanging beside hers. The fire in the stove cast a warm glow throughout the small space, the rain drumming on the roof creating a cozy cocoon. "Looks like we're here until the storm passes," Ethan said, glancing out the small window at the darkening sky. Tessa nodded, suddenly aware of how intimate the situation was, alone in a one-room shack with a man she had known for only a few months, both of them essentially undressed beneath rough blankets. A proper lady would be mortified. Instead, Tessa found herself feeling strangely at peace. "Tell me about your travels," she said, settling on the bed, drawing her knees up beneath the blanket. Ethan began to speak, his voice low and steady against the backdrop of rain, telling her about the places he'd seen, the people he'd met, the work he'd done. As the afternoon wore on, the small space filled with stories and occasional laughter. The storm showed no signs of abating, and as evening approached, Ethan used provisions from the shack to prepare a simple meal of beans and coffee. They ate sitting side by side on the edge of the bed, the only place to sit besides the single chair. Their shoulders occasionally brushed, sending an unexpected warmth through Tessa that had nothing to do with the fire or the blanket. "We'll have to stay the night," Ethan said as darkness fell, looking concerned. "I'll take the floor." "Don't be ridiculous," Tessa replied. "The bed is small but adequate for both of us if we're careful. It's too cold for you to sleep on the floor." Ethan's eyes met hers, searching. "Tessa, I don't want to compromise your reputation." "My reputation?" She laughed without humor. "I'm a soon-to-be divorced woman working as a hired hand. I'm not sure there's much reputation left to protect." "You're a lady," Ethan said firmly. "And I aim to treat you as such." Tessa was touched by his respect but also frustrated by the limitations of propriety. "We're two adults caught in a storm. We can share a bed without impropriety." After some negotiation, they arranged themselves carefully on the narrow bed, back to back, the blankets creating a barrier between them. Despite the awkwardness, Tessa soon found herself drifting off to sleep, lulled by the rain and the warmth of Ethan's presence. She woke once in the night to find they had shifted in sleep, her head now resting against Ethan's chest, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. She knew she should move away, maintain the proper distance, but in the darkness, with the rain still falling outside, she allowed herself this moment of comfort. Ethan's steady heartbeat beneath her ear was the most soothing sound she had ever heard, and she fell back asleep with a sense of security she had never experienced with Garrett. Morning brought clear skies and the awkwardness of reality. Their clothes were dry, if wrinkled, and they dressed with careful modesty, backs turned to each other. As they prepared to leave, Tessa felt a strange reluctance to return to the ranch, to end this unexpected interlude. "Ethan," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. He turned to her, his expression gentle. "We should go. Rose will be worried." Tessa nodded, disappointed but understanding. They rode back in silence, arriving at the ranch by mid-morning. Rose was indeed concerned but relieved to see them safe, accepting their explanation about the storm without comment. Over the following weeks, something shifted between Tessa and Ethan. The wildflowers continued to appear, but now they were accompanied by other small gestures: a book he thought she might enjoy, a piece of peppermint candy from town, a wooden comb he had carved himself. They began to seek out moments alone together: walks after supper, early morning coffee on the porch before chores began, Sunday afternoons reading under the large oak tree behind the house. They rarely touched, maintaining the propriety expected of a lady and a gentleman in public, but their conversations grew deeper, more personal. Tessa learned about Ethan's dream of someday having his own small ranch, not to raise cattle but to breed and train horses. Ethan learned about Tessa's love of books and her secret desire to have continued her education beyond the finishing school her parents had sent her to. "You could still learn," he pointed out one evening as they sat on the porch swing. "The schoolteacher in Willow Creek has quite a library, I hear." "At my age?" Tessa laughed. "You're 26, not 60, Ethan replied. "Besides, learning doesn't need schoolrooms." The divorce proceedings progressed in Riverdale, with Martha keeping Tessa informed through regular letters. Garrett had indeed installed Victoria in their home, causing a scandal that had divided the town's opinion. Some sympathized with Tessa, others criticized her for abandoning her husband. "Do you ever miss it?" Ethan asked one day as they rode fence lines together. "The fine house, the position in society?" Tessa considered this seriously. "I miss certain comforts," she admitted. "Hot baths that I don't have to haul and heat water for. New dresses. Books whenever I want them." She looked at the vast landscape around them, the freedom of it. "But no, I don't miss the life. It was beautiful but hollow." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Like a fancy cake with nothing inside." "Exactly," she agreed, surprised and pleased by his perception. In September, a letter arrived that changed everything. The divorce was final, but there was more. Garrett had suffered a financial reversal. The bank had failed, and he had fled Riverdale with Victoria, leaving behind substantial debts. Most shocking of all, Martha wrote that Tessa's name was still on the deed to the house on Cherry Street, and as Garrett's legal wife at the time of purchase, she had claim to it despite the divorce. "You could go back," Rose said when Tessa shared the news. "Be a property owner in your own right." Tessa looked around the kitchen where she had learned to cook, out the window at the garden she had tended, across the yard to the barn where Ethan was brushing down his horse. "I don't know if I want to," she admitted. That evening, she showed the letter to Ethan during their customary walk. "It's an opportunity," he acknowledged after reading it. "Financial security." "Yes," Tessa agreed, hearing the hesitation in his voice that matched her own feelings. "But Riverdale has so many memories, none of them particularly happy." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "Could sell it," he suggested. "Use the money to start fresh somewhere else." The idea took root in Tessa's mind. She could sell the house, have funds of her own, true independence. But where would she go? What would she do? And what about Ethan? As if reading her thoughts, he stopped walking and turned to face her. "Been thinking about that piece of land over by Eagle Creek?" he said, his voice careful, measured. Good water, good grazing, small cabin that could be fixed up proper. Tessa's heart began to beat faster. For your horse ranch? Maybe. He looked at her directly, those green eyes serious. Depends. On what? Ethan took a deep breath. On whether I'd be there alone or not. The world seemed to still around them. Tessa understood what he was asking, what he was offering. Not a grand declaration of love, but something more solid, a future together, built on mutual respect and growing affection. Are you asking me to go with you? She whispered. I'm asking if you'd consider it, he replied. As my wife. The word hung between them, full of meaning. Wife. Not a possession, not a decoration for his arm, but a partner. I don't have much to offer, Ethan continued when she didn't immediately respond. No fancy house like you had. No position in society. Just honest work and… He hesitated, then finished simply. And my heart, such as it is. Tears filled Tessa's eyes, not of sadness but of a joy so unexpected it overwhelmed her. Your heart is the finest thing anyone has ever offered me, she said. Ethan's expression softened, and for the first time, he reached for her hand, his callous fingers gently enfolding hers. Is that a yes? Tessa nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Ethan's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, rare and beautiful and full of promise. Slowly, carefully, he bent his head and pressed his lips to hers in a first kiss that was gentle but sure, a seal on a promise either of them made lightly. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Willow Creek, Rose standing as witness, the preacher pronouncing them husband and wife with the same words Tessa had heard 6 years earlier with Garrett. But this time, the vows felt true, the commitment real in a way it had never been before. They spent their wedding night in the hotel in town, the only privacy Ethan could afford to give her. His touch was reverent, his patience infinite as they discovered each other, as husband and wife. Tessa found in his arms a passion she had never known existed, a connection that went beyond the physical to touch something deep in her soul. In the morning, he presented her with a final bouquet of wildflowers, picked fresh at dawn while she still slept. These are the last until spring, he said, placing them in her hands. But I'll find other ways to remind you. Remind me of what? She asked, bringing the flowers to her face to breathe in their sweet scent. That beauty can grow in the unlikeliest places, he said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Even in broken hearts. October found them traveling to Riverdale, a journey neither looked forward to but necessary to settle Tessa's affairs. The town had changed little in the months of her absence, the same dusty streets, the same storefronts, the same curious glances as she rode beside Ethan toward the house on Cherry Street. Martha met them there, keys in hand, her face splitting into a wide smile at the sight of them together. Married! She exclaimed, hugging Tessa fiercely. When you left here, I never imagined you'd find happiness so soon. Neither did I, Tessa admitted, glancing at Ethan with a smile. The house was exactly as Tessa had left it, though with a layer of dust covering the fine furnishings. It felt smaller somehow, less impressive than in her memory. As she walked through the rooms, Ethan a quiet presence behind her, Tessa felt no attachment to the place that had once been the center of her world. Sell it all, she decided by the end of the day. The house, the furnishings. Except for my mother's china and the books. Those I'll keep. It took a week to arrange the sale, during which they stayed with Martha rather than in the house that held too many ghosts. The money from the sale was substantial, enough to build a proper home on the land Ethan had purchased by Eagle Creek, with plenty left over to start the horse business he dreamed of. On their last day in Riverdale, as they prepared to leave, Tessa encountered Victoria in the general store. The woman was beautiful, with golden hair and perfect features, though there was a hardness in her eyes that beauty couldn't mask. She froze when she saw Tessa, clearly expecting confrontation. Instead, Tessa smiled and nodded politely before continuing with her purchases. Later, Ethan asked if the encounter had upset her. Strangely, no, Tessa replied. I almost felt grateful to her. If not for her, I might never have left. I might never have found you. Ethan's arms slipped around her waist, a public display of affection he rarely indulged in. Then I suppose I owe her a debt as well. The land by Eagle Creek was everything Ethan had described, a rolling meadow bordered by a clear stream, backed by pine forest, with distant mountains framing the view. The cabin was rough but sound, with a stone fireplace and 2 rooms that could be made comfortable with work. They arrived as the first snow of winter dusted the ground, giving them just enough time to make the cabin weathertight before the harsh Colorado winter set in. Those first months were difficult, cold mornings, long nights, and endless work to create a home from almost nothing. But they were happy in a way Tessa had never imagined possible, finding joy in simple accomplishments and comfort in each other's arms. By spring, they had plans drawn for a proper house to be built beside the cabin, with lumber ordered from the sawmill in Willow Creek. Ethan had acquired his first 2 breeding mares, the foundation of his dream. Tessa had planted a garden and started a small flock of chickens, putting down roots in this place that was wholly theirs. On a warm May morning, exactly 1 year after Ethan had first brought her wildflowers, Tessa woke to find him gone from their bed. She dressed and stepped outside to find him returning from the meadow, hands full of the same purple blooms she had first found on Rose's porch steps. "Happy anniversary," he said, presenting them with a smile that still made her heart skip. Tessa took the flowers, inhaling their sweet scent, remembering how far they had come. "I have something for you too," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her stomach. "Come November, we won't be alone here anymore." Ethan's eyes widened, then filled with such joy that Tessa felt her own eyes welling with tears. He dropped to his knees before her, pressing his face against the still flat plane of her abdomen, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Thank you," he whispered against her dress. "For the flowers, for the silence, for understanding when I couldn't find the right words." Tessa ran her fingers through his hair, her heart full to bursting. "And thank you," she replied, "for showing me what love truly means." As summer progressed, their dreams took physical form around them. The new house rose beam by beam, Ethan working alongside the hired builders, creating a home designed for a family with room to grow. Tessa's garden flourished, providing fresh vegetables for their table and extras to preserve for winter. Her body changed too, rounding with new life, bringing a glow to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the summer sun. Rose came to visit in July, marveling at the transformation of both the property and Tessa herself. "You were meant for this life," she declared, watching Tessa confidently managing the household. "I've never seen you so happy. I never knew I could be this happy," Tessa admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm dreaming." In August, a letter arrived from Martha with unexpected news. Garrett had returned to Riverdale, alone and penniless. Victoria had left him for another wealthy man in Denver. He was staying at the boarding house, working as a clerk in the very bank he had once owned, humbled by his reversals. "Do you want to see him?" Ethan asked when Tessa shared the letter, his voice carefully neutral. Tessa considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "There's nothing left to say. That chapter of my life is closed." Ethan nodded, relief evident in his eyes. "Good. Because I'm not inclined to share you, even for a conversation." Tessa laughed, leaning against his solid strength. "Possessive, Mr. Miles?" "Protective," he corrected, placing a hand on her growing belly. "Of both of you." Their daughter, Emily Rose Miles, was born on a snowy November evening, with a local midwife attending and Ethan pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. She entered the world with a lusty cry and a shock of dark hair that reminded Tessa of Ethan's. When the midwife finally allowed him in, Ethan approached the bed with such reverence that Tessa felt tears spring to her eyes. He gazed down at the tiny bundle in her arms, reaching out one finger to touch the perfect cheek. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "Like her mother." "Strong," Tessa countered. "Like her father." Ethan settled carefully on the edge of the bed, drawing both of them into the circle of his arms. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "A family of my own." "Neither did I," Tessa said softly. "Not a real one, built on love instead of obligation." They moved into the new house just before Christmas, the large stone fireplace decorated with pine boughs, the windows sparkling with candlelight. Ethan carried Tessa across the threshold despite her protests that it wasn't necessary for a woman who had been married nearly 8 months and already had a child. "Humor me," he said with a smile. "I want to do this right." That first Christmas in their new home set the pattern for years to come, simple celebrations focused on family and gratitude rather than elaborate displays of wealth. Ethan's horse breeding business grew steadily, developing a reputation for quality stock throughout the territory. Tessa found unexpected fulfillment in keeping the books for the ranch, discovering she had a head for figures that Ethan lacked. By their 5th anniversary, they had added twin boys to their family, Thomas and Elijah, 3-year-old bundles of energy who idolized their father and followed him everywhere. Emily, now 4, was already showing signs of her mother's intelligence and her father's quiet determination. On that anniversary morning, Ethan brought Tessa wildflowers as he had every year, laying them beside her on the pillow before the children tumbled into their bed for morning cuddles. Later, after the children were settled with their lessons, Ethan led Tessa to the barn, where a new mare stood in one of the stalls. "Happy anniversary," he said, watching her stroke the beautiful animal's nose. "She's yours." "Mine?" Tessa laughed in surprise. "Ethan, I barely know how to ride." "Time you learn properly," he replied. "The children are getting old enough that you could have some time for yourself now and then." Tessa looked at the mare, then at her husband, seeing in his eyes the understanding that had been there from the beginning that she needed to grow, to challenge herself, to continue becoming the woman she was meant to be. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just for the horse. That evening, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the sky in the same colors that had greeted Tessa on that first day at Rose's ranch. Ethan's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Leaving behind the life you had for this?" Tessa thought of the fine house in Riverdale, the social position she had once valued, the ease of a life without physical labor. Then she looked at the home they had built together, thought of their children sleeping peacefully inside, felt the steady beat of Ethan's heart beneath her cheek. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment." Ethan's arm tightened around her. "Good. Because I plan to keep bringing you wildflowers for at least the next 50 years. Tessa smiled, turning her face up to his for a kiss that still held the same sweetness as their first. "I'm counting on it," she whispered against his lips. As darkness settled over their land, bringing out the first stars of evening, Tessa thought about the journey that had brought her here from the weeping woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal to the confident wife and mother she had become. Her heart, once broken, had healed stronger than before, nurtured by wildflowers and silence, and the patient love of a man who had seen her true worth when she couldn't see it herself. In the end, what had seemed like the worst moment of her life had become the first step toward the best of all possible futures, one she had built with her own hands, her own choices, and her own courage to begin again.